The sun was dying over Silver Creek when the Apache woman's fist hit the rancher's door, the last door in a town that had already slammed shut 6 times. Taya Redbird had 3 crumpled dollars, skin caked in desert dust, and a desperate need for water. Inside, widowed rancher Caleb Holt stood frozen, his hand on the latch, caught between the paranoia of 1880s Arizona and the ghost of his dead wife whispering one word: mercy. What happened next would tear this town apart, or rebuild it from nothing. Before we begin this journey across the unforgiving frontier, I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. And please drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see just how far across this world our tale travels tonight. The desert had no mercy, and neither did Silver Creek. Taya Redbird knew this truth in her bones, had known it since childhood, since the first time she'd watched white settlers ride through her people's land with eyes that saw nothing but dirt and obstacles. She knew it in the ache of her feet, blistered and bleeding inside boots held together with hope and leather scraps. She knew it in the hollow of her stomach, empty for 2 days except for the brackish water she'd sucked from a trader's canteen 40 miles back. But knowing a truth and accepting it were two different things entirely. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks west of Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Taya stood at the edge of town, her shadows stretching long and thin across the dusty main street. She'd walked 70 miles through heat that could cook a man's brain inside his skull. 70 miles with nothing but $3 pressed against her heart, wrapped in cloth, and tucked into the inner pocket of her worn cotton dress. $3? A fortune to some, a joke to others. To Taya, it was survival, or at least she'd hoped it would be. The first door she'd knocked on belonged to the miller's house, a whitewashed structure with blue shutters and a garden that someone clearly loved. A woman had answered, middle-aged, flower on her apron, kindness in her eyes, until she saw who was asking. "Please," Taya had said, her voice rough as sandpaper from thirst and exhaustion. "I can pay. I just need water, a basin to wash. I have money." The kindness had evaporated like morning dew. The woman's face had hardened into something carved from stone. "We don't serve your kind here," she'd said, and shut the door so fast Taya had to pull her fingers back to avoid them being crushed. The second door was the general store. The owner, a thin man with spectacles and a nervous disposition, had actually let her inside. For a moment, Taya had felt hope bloom in her chest. But when she'd pulled out her $3, asking if she could buy some soap and use their water pump out back, the man's wife had appeared from behind the counter like a vengeful spirit. "Absolutely not," the woman had hissed. "Bad enough they let your people into town for trade. We're not running a charity for savages." Taya had left without a word, her pride too battered to fight back. The third door, fourth door, fifth door, all variations on the same theme: suspicion, fear, disgust. Sometimes they didn't even open the door all the way, just cracked it enough to peer out and shake their heads. One man had set his dog on her, a mangy beast that barked and snapped at her heels until she'd retreated back to the street. By the sixth door, the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Pritchard, Taya could barely stand upright. The exhaustion was winning. Her vision swam with dark spots, and her tongue felt like leather in her mouth. Mrs. Pritchard had been different, at least. She'd opened the door fully, looked Taya up and down with something that might have been pity, and sighed. "I'm sorry, dear. I truly am. But if I let you stay here, if word gets out, I'll lose every boarder I have. This town, they're not ready for that kind of change." "I'm not asking to stay," Taya had whispered. "Just water. Just a moment to wash the dust off. I'll pay." Mrs. Pritchard had glanced over her shoulder, as if checking whether anyone was watching, then looked back at Taya with genuine regret in her eyes. "I can't. I'm sorry. There's a ranch about a mile outside town, West Road, past the Crooked Oak. Caleb Holt's place. He keeps to himself. Might be your only chance." And then she too had closed the door. Taya had stood there on that porch for a long moment, swaying slightly, the world tilting around her. She'd come so far, asked for so little, and yet it was too much. But she was Apache. Her grandmother had survived the long walk. Her mother had buried 3 children and still woke every morning to greet the sun. Taya Redbird was not going to collapse in the street of a town full of people who wished she didn't exist. She would find this ranch, this Caleb Holt, and if he too turned her away, well, then she would lie down under the stars and let the desert take her back. The walk to Caleb Holt's ranch was the longest mile of Taya's life. Her legs moved by memory rather than strength, each step a negotiation between will and body. The sun had fully set now, leaving only the deep purple twilight that preceded true darkness. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, their voices sharp and lonely. The crooked oak Mrs. Pritchard had mentioned stood like a sentinel at the fork in the road, its trunk twisted by decades of desert wind into a shape that looked almost human, a bent old man pointing the way. Taya followed that wooden finger down a dirt path that wound between clusters of sagebrush and patches of dried grass. When the ranch house came into view, she nearly wept. It wasn't grand, not by any measure. A simple structure of weathered wood and stone, single story, with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. A barn stood off to the left, its doors closed against the coming night, corrals empty. A windmill turned slowly in the breeze, its metallic groan carrying across the quiet land. Smoke rose from the chimney, gray against the darkening sky. Someone was home. Taya approached slowly, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the $3 against her chest. This was it. The last door, the last chance. She climbed the 3 steps to the porch, each one requiring effort that seemed monumental. Her hand raised, hesitated. What if he's like the others? What if he's worse? But what choice did she have? Her knuckles struck wood. Once, twice, 3 times. Inside she heard movement, footsteps, the scrape of a chair, then silence. She could feel him on the other side of the door, frozen, deciding. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but she knew he could hear. "I don't mean harm. I just need water. I have money. $3. I just need to wash." More silence. Taya closed her eyes, prepared for the rejection, for the door to remain closed, for the long walk back to town where she would finally surrender to the exhaustion that had been chasing her for days. But then, the sound of a bolt sliding back. The door opened. Caleb Holt was not what Taya had expected. She'd braced herself for hostility, for cruelty, for another variation of disgust and dismissal. Instead, the man standing in the doorway looked as worn down by life as she felt. He was perhaps 40 years old, though hard living might have made him look older than he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples and lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. He wore work clothes, denim trousers, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, suspenders hanging loose at his sides. But it was his eyes that caught her. Gray-blue, like storm clouds over mountains. And in them, a kind of hollowness that Taya recognized immediately. This was a man who had lost something irreplaceable. They stared at each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Taya could see him taking her in, the dust coating her skin and clothes, the exhaustion in her posture, the way she swayed slightly, even standing still. She watched him warn with himself, saw suspicion and caution battle against something else, something that looked like memory. "You came from town," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "They turned you away." "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew about Silver Creek and its inhabitants. His jaw tightened. "How many doors?" "6, Taya said. "Before Mrs. Pritchard told me about you." "Clara Pritchard told you to come here?" Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or irony. "She said you keep to yourself, that you might be my only chance." Taya pulled out the $3, held them up with a trembling hand. "I can pay. I'm not asking for charity, just water, soap, a basin to wash in. I'll be gone before dawn." Caleb stared at the money for a long moment, then back at her face. She saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made, a line being crossed. "Put your money away," he said quietly. Taya's heart sank. Here it comes. The rejection. But instead of closing the door, he stepped back and opened it wider. Come inside. Taya didn't move at first. She'd been rejected so many times today that kindness felt like a trap. I won't hurt you, Caleb said, misreading her hesitation. I'm just offering water and a place to clean up. That's what you asked for, isn't it? Yes, Taya managed, but no buts. You're dead on your feet and it'll be full dark soon. The desert at night is no place for anyone, especially not someone who looks like they've been walking for days. He gestured into the house. Come on, before I change my mind. That last part, said with the hint of self-deprecating humor, somehow convinced her more than anything else could have. A man who could mock his own hesitation was a man who'd already made his choice. Taya stepped across the threshold. The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean. A main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind a metal grate. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area. Shelves lined the walls, holding plates, cups, jars of preserved foods. A door led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything was tidy, orderly, but there was a quality to the tidiness that spoke of duty rather than love, as if the man who lived here maintained it out of habit, not desire. Sit, Caleb said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Before you fall down. Taya wanted to protest, to maintain her dignity, but her body betrayed her. She sank into the chair, and the relief of sitting was so profound she had to suppress a groan. Caleb moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. He grabbed a large pot, carried it to the pump by the sink, and began filling it with water. The sound of the pump, squeak, splash, was hypnotic. Taya watched him work, trying to understand this man who'd opened his door when 6 others had closed theirs. Thank you, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. Don't thank me yet, just sit there and rest. When the pot was full, he carried it to the fireplace and hung it on a hook over the flames. Need to heat it, won't take long. He grabbed a second, smaller pot and filled it with cold water, brought it over with a tin cup. Drink, slowly. Taya took the cup with trembling hands and raised it to her lips. The water was cool, clean, perfect. She wanted to gulp it down, to drain the entire pot, but she forced herself to sip slowly as he'd instructed. Even so, the relief was immediate and overwhelming. When did you last eat? Caleb asked. Day before yesterday, some jerky and hard biscuit. He nodded, moved back to the kitchen, and began pulling items from the shelves. Bread, cheese, some kind of dried meat. He assembled a simple meal on a plate and set it in front of her. Eat. I can pay. I don't want your money. His voice was firm but not unkind. Just eat. Taya ate. She tried to maintain composure, to eat slowly and with dignity, but hunger won out. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp, the meat salty and satisfying. She devoured it in minutes, barely pausing to breathe. Caleb watched her without comment, then refilled her cup of water. There's more if you want it. This is enough. Thank you. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. You're very kind. I'm not kind, he said, surprising her with his bluntness. If I were kind, I would have opened the door faster. There was something in his voice, guilt, perhaps, or shame, that made Taya study him more carefully. But you did open it. Eventually. He checked the pot over the fire, testing the water temperature with his finger. My wife used to say that decency delayed is decency denied. She was right about most things. The way he said used to told Taya everything. I'm sorry for your loss. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. It's been 2 years. People keep telling me it gets easier. Does it? No. The single word was flat, final. Then he seemed to shake himself, pulling back from whatever dark place he'd ventured into. He grabbed a large basin from a shelf and set it on the floor near the fireplace. Water's almost ready. There's soap on the shelf and I can fetch some towels. You can wash here by the fire. It's warm. Taya stood slowly, her legs protesting. You're letting a stranger into your home, feeding her, giving her water to wash with. You don't even know my name. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something ancient and sad in his eyes. You're a human being who needed help. That's all I need to know. He paused. But I'm Caleb. Caleb Holt. Taya Redbird. He nodded once, as if filing the information away. The water's ready, Miss Redbird. I'll step outside while you wash. Take your time. You don't have to, I know, but you've been rejected enough for one day. Least I can do is give you some privacy. He grabbed a jacket from a hook by the door. I'll be on the porch if you need anything. And then he was gone. The door closing softly behind him, leaving Taya alone with the fire and the water and a kindness so unexpected it made her throat tighten with emotion. Taya stood alone in Caleb Holt's home, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of her own breathing. For a long moment she didn't move, couldn't quite believe this was real. After so many rejections, after so much cruelty disguised as caution, this simple act of human decency felt almost miraculous. She moved to the pot hanging over the fire and carefully lifted it down using the towel Caleb had left draped over the mantel. The water was hot, not scalding, but hot enough to steam in the cooling evening air. She poured it into the basin, then added cold water from the pump until the temperature was perfect. The soap on the shelf was simple lye soap, rough and unscented, but to Taya it might as well have been the finest luxury. She took it down, along with the towels Caleb had mentioned, and knelt beside the basin. For a moment, she just looked at the water, at the reflection of the firelight dancing across its surface. When was the last time she'd been truly clean? Weeks, at least. Maybe longer. The desert got inside you, became part of you, in your hair, under your nails, ground into your skin, until you forgot what it felt like to be anything else. Taya began with her hands, plunging them into the warm water and watching the dirt dissolve away in dark clouds. She scrubbed with the soap, working it between her fingers, under her nails, up her forearms. The water turned gray almost immediately. She moved on to her face, splashing the warm water over her skin, feeling the accumulated grime of days begin to lift away. She scrubbed her neck, her ears, behind her ears. With each pass of the cloth, she felt more human, less like a thing the desert had spit out. But it was her hair that needed the most attention. She'd worn it in a long braid down her back, but the dust had infiltrated even that. She undid the braid, letting her hair fall past her shoulders, dark and thick, and so dirty it had lost all its natural sheen. She dunked her head into the basin, soaking her hair completely, then worked the soap through it with her fingers. It took 3 rinses before the water finally ran clear. When she sat back on her heels, breathing hard from the effort, she felt transformed. The exhaustion was still there. That wouldn't disappear with just soap and water. But the layer of filth that had made her feel less than human was gone. She was herself again. Taya Redbird. A woman, not a burden. A person, not a problem. She wrung out her hair as best she could, then used one of the towels to dry it partially. The other towel she used to clean her feet, blistered and bleeding in places, covered in calluses and scabs. She worked gently, wincing at the pain, but determined to be thorough. When she was done, she looked down at the water in the basin. It was nearly black. The physical evidence of just how much she'd needed this, how desperate her situation had been. And this man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had given it freely. Taya stood, smoothed down her dress, still dusty and worn, but at least she was clean beneath it, and rebraided her hair. She picked up the basin, carried it to the door, and pushed it open with her hip. Caleb was sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the darkness that had fully descended while she'd been washing. He turned at the sound of the door, then stood quickly. "You're done?" "Yes. Where should I—" She gestured at the basin of dirty water. "I'll take it." He took the basin from her hands, carried it to the edge of the porch, and tossed the water out onto the dry ground. "Feel better?" "More than I can say." Taya reached into her dress pocket, pulled out the $3. "Please, I know you said you didn't want payment, but— and I meant it." His voice was gentle but firm. "Put your money away, Miss Redbird." "But water and soap, the food, your time, it's worth—" "It's worth nothing," he interrupted. "Or rather, it's worth exactly what it cost me, which is almost nothing. You don't owe me money for basic human kindness." Taya stared at him, this tall, worn man standing in the darkness of his porch, holding an empty basin. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why did you open the door when so many others didn't?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the dark prairie. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost as if he were talking to himself. My wife, Rachel, she died 2 years ago. Fever that the doctor couldn't cure, couldn't even explain. She was gone in 3 days. He paused, his throat working. Before she died, when she knew she wasn't going to make it, she made me promise something. She said, "Caleb, when I'm gone, don't let this world make you hard. Don't let grief turn you into stone. Promise me you'll remember that everyone you meet is carrying their own burden, and sometimes the only thing standing between a person and complete despair is someone else's willingness to open a door." Taya felt tears prick at her eyes. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. He set the basin down, turned to face her fully. I've broken that promise more times than I can count these past 2 years. I've kept to myself, avoided town, avoided people. When you knocked on my door tonight, my first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home, to let you walk away like everyone else did. He shook his head. But I heard her voice, clear as day, reminding me of that promise. So I opened the door. I'm glad you did. So am I. He offered a small smile, the first she'd seen from him. You can sleep in the barn if you'd like. It's clean, there's fresh hay, and it's warmer than sleeping outside. I don't want to impose. You're not. I'm offering. He gestured toward the barn. Come on, I'll show you. The barn was indeed clean and surprisingly cozy. Caleb lit a lantern that hung from a beam, casting warm light across the interior. There were 3 stalls, all empty. Bales of hay stacked neatly along one wall, tools organized on the other, a ladder leading up to a loft where more hay was stored. I sold off most of my horses last year, Caleb explained, his voice echoing slightly in the space. Didn't need them anymore, and couldn't afford to keep them fed. Just kept one for riding into town when necessary. He pointed to the loft. There's more hay up there, cleaner and softer. You'll be comfortable enough. Taya climbed the ladder, and Caleb was right. The hay in the loft was fresh and sweet-smelling. It would be more comfortable than any place she'd slept in weeks. Thank you, she called down, for everything. Caleb nodded, his face half in shadow from the lantern light. You're welcome. I'll bring you a blanket and leave it at the bottom of the ladder. Door locks from the inside if that makes you feel safer. I feel safe enough, Taya said, and she was surprised to find it was true. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Redbird, where were you headed? Before Silver Creek? Taya settled into the hay, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. Nowhere in particular, just away from where I was. Caleb seemed to understand that some stories weren't ready to be told. Well, you're welcome to stay the night. In the morning, if you're still needing to move on, I can give you some supplies for the road. You've already given me so much. Maybe. He picked up the lantern. Or maybe you've given me something too. Reminder that I'm still capable of doing the right thing when it matters. That's worth more than $3. He nodded to her. Good night, Miss Redbird. Good night, Mr. Holt. He descended the ladder, and she heard his footsteps cross the barn, heard the door open and close. A moment later, she saw light from the lantern moving across the yard toward the house, growing smaller until it disappeared inside. Taya lay back in the hay, staring up at the dark rafters of the barn, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the wind, the distant coyotes, the creak of the windmill. For the first time in days, she felt safe, clean, fed, protected. And all because one man had remembered a promise to his dead wife. She pulled the $3 from her pocket, looked at them in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls. These 3 pieces of silver had become something more than money tonight. They'd become a test, a measure of humanity in a world that often had very little. Most people had failed that test, but Caleb Holt had passed. Taya tucked the money back into her pocket and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, but tonight she would rest. Tonight she would be grateful. Tonight she would remember that there was still goodness in the world, even in the most unexpected places. In the ranch house, Caleb Holt sat alone at his kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in front of him. He was staring at the door he'd almost not opened, the door behind which a woman had stood asking for the smallest scrap of human dignity. How close had he come to turning her away? How close had he come to being just like the rest of Silver Creek, locked behind fear and prejudice, convinced that safety meant closing doors rather than opening them? He thought about Rachel, as he did every night. Rachel with her bright laugh and her unshakable faith in human goodness. Rachel who'd seen the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. Rachel who'd made him promise to stay soft in a hard world. He'd been failing her for 2 years. But tonight, for just a moment, he'd remembered how to keep his word. Caleb stood, walked to the window that faced the barn. He couldn't see much in the darkness, just the dark outline of the building against the star-scattered sky. But he knew Taya Redbird was in there, finally able to rest after whatever ordeal had brought her to his door. He didn't know her story, didn't know where she'd come from or what she was running from or where she was going, but he'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the defeat in her posture, the way she'd held on to those $3 like they were the last solid thing in a world that was trying to wash her away. And he'd done what he could. It wasn't much. Water and soap. Bread and cheese. A place to sleep that wasn't the cold ground. But it was something. "I'm trying, Rachel," he whispered to the darkness. "I'm still trying." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed across the empty prairie. Caleb turned from the window, banked the fire, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow, the town would probably find out he'd given shelter to an Apache woman. Tomorrow, there would be questions and judgment and consequences he couldn't predict. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, he'd done the right thing. Tonight, his wife would have been proud. And for the first time in 2 years, that thought didn't bring him pain. It brought him peace. He lay down in the bed that still felt too big, too empty, and closed his eyes. Sleep came easier than it had in months. And if he dreamed of doors opening instead of closing, of bridges being built instead of walls, of a world where $3 and a basin of water could be the beginning of something that mattered. In the barn, Taya Redbird slept deeply, her body finally able to rest, her mind finally quiet. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if this temporary sanctuary would last beyond a single night. But she'd learned something tonight. She'd learned that Silver Creek might be full of closed doors and cold hearts, but on its edges, on the outskirts where the town met the wild, there was at least one man who remembered what it meant to be human. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Dawn broke over the Holt Ranch with the kind of silence that makes every small sound seem significant. The creak of the windmill, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the distant call of a mourning dove announcing the new day. Taya woke slowly, consciousness returning in layers. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, only that she was warm, that she wasn't hungry, that something fundamental had shifted. Then memory flooded back, the walk, the rejections, the last door, Caleb Holt's weathered face as he'd stepped aside to let her in. She sat up in the hay, pieces of it clinging to her dress and hair. Through the gaps in the barn walls, she could see golden light spreading across the prairie. She'd slept through the entire night without waking once, a luxury she hadn't experienced in weeks. Her body still ached, her feet still throbbed, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased. She felt almost human again. Taya climbed down the ladder carefully, her sore muscles protesting, and pushed open the barn door. The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The ranch house stood quiet, smoke just beginning to rise from the chimney. Caleb was awake. She walked slowly across the yard, uncertain of the protocol. Should she knock? Call out? Simply leave and save them both the awkwardness of a morning after unexpected kindness? But before she could decide, the door opened and Caleb emerged, a bucket in his hand. He stopped when he saw her, a moment of surprise crossing his face before settling into something more neutral. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Taya stood awkwardly in the middle of the yard, suddenly aware of how she must look. Hay in her hair, dress wrinkled, still wearing yesterday's dust beneath the cleanliness. "I should go. I've imposed enough." "Have you had breakfast?" The question caught her off guard. "No, but then you haven't imposed enough." He set the bucket down. "Come inside. I've got coffee on and was about to make eggs." "Mr. Holt, you've already done so much." "It's just breakfast, Miss Redbird. And call me Caleb. Mr. Holt was my father, and he wasn't a man worth the formality. He turned back toward the house, clearly expecting her to follow. Come on, eggs get cold fast. Taya hesitated only a moment before following him inside. The ranch house looked different in daylight, less shadowy, more lived in, though still carrying that quality of a space maintained by duty rather than joy. Caleb moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of a man who'd been cooking for himself for a long time, cracking eggs into a pan, stirring them with practiced motions. Sit, he said, nodding toward the table. Taya sat, watching him work. There was something meditative about his movements, something that spoke of routine carved so deep it had become part of him. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, brought them to the table, then returned to the eggs. How'd you sleep? He asked, not turning around. Better than I have in months. Hay's comfortable if you're tired enough. He scooped eggs onto 2 plates, added some bread he must have made earlier, and brought the food to the table. Nothing fancy. It's perfect. And it was. The eggs were fluffy, seasoned simply with salt and pepper. The bread was dense and hearty. Taya ate slowly this time, savoring each bite, trying to make it last. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Caleb spoke again. Where were you headed? Before Silver Creek? Taya took a sip of coffee, buying herself time to decide how much truth to share. Nowhere specific, just away. Away from what? Does it matter? Caleb studied her over the rim of his cup. No, suppose it doesn't. We all got things we're running from. He paused. Or running toward. What are you running from? The question slipped out before Taya could stop it. Too personal, too direct. But Caleb didn't seem offended. He just looked down at his plate, pushing eggs around with his fork. Memory, mostly. This whole place is full of her. Rachel. Every corner, every object, every routine. I keep thinking if I just maintain things exactly as she left them, maybe it'll hurt less. But it doesn't work that way. Why don't you leave? And go where? He looked up at her. This was our dream, hers and mine. Build a ranch, make a life, raise a family. She's buried out past the East Corral, under a cottonwood tree she loved. I can't just leave her. Taya understood that kind of loyalty, that kind of love that persisted beyond death. She was lucky to have you. I was the lucky one. He stood abruptly, as if the emotion was too much, and began clearing the plates. What's your plan now? Keep moving? I suppose so, though I'm not sure where. You got skills? Things you can do? Taya bristled slightly at the question, hearing echoes of every person who'd ever assumed she was useless because of who she was. I can mend things, sew, cook, work with leather. I'm good with animals. I can shoot if needed. I'm not helpless, if that's what you're asking. Wasn't implying you were. Caleb pumped water into the sink, began washing the plates. Just thinking that if you're looking for work, I could use some help around here. Taya stared at his back. What? You said you wanted to work for the water and soap. Well, there's more work here than I can handle alone. Fences need mending. Garden's a disaster. Rachel used to keep it beautiful, but I don't have her touch. Chickens need tending. House could use a proper cleaning. He turned to face her. I can't pay much. Room and board, maybe $1 a week in actual money. It's not much, but why would you do this? Taya interrupted, standing up from the table. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me, except that I showed up at your door desperate. That's true, Caleb admitted. But I also know you offered to pay for water when you clearly didn't have money to spare. I know you walked away from trouble instead of causing it. I know you're proud enough to work rather than beg, and tired enough that you probably should be begging. He crossed his arms. Besides, what's the alternative? You walk back to Silver Creek and get more doors slammed in your face? Head out into the desert with $3 and hope you find somewhere more welcoming? How far you think you'll get? Taya wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, but the truth of his words struck home. She had nowhere to go, no prospects. $3 wouldn't get her far, and another walk like the one that had brought her here might actually kill her. I don't accept charity, she said quietly. Good, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering work, hard work. You'll earn every cent, every meal, every night of shelter. I'm not doing this out of pity, Miss Redbird. I'm doing it because I need help, and you need work. and that's just good business. The town won't like it, an Apache woman working at your ranch. The town can go to hell. The vehemence in his voice surprised her. I stopped caring what Silver Creek thinks the day they couldn't be bothered to help my wife when she was dying. Doctor was too busy to come out here. Store wouldn't deliver supplies on credit. Even the preacher had an excuse why he couldn't visit. His jaw tightened. They want to judge me for giving someone a job? Let them. Taya studied him carefully, this strange man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even said. If I stay, if I work here, people will talk. They'll say things. About both of us. Let them talk. They might do more than talk, they might cause trouble. I can handle trouble. Can you? Taya stepped closer. Because I've seen what happens when white folks decide someone doesn't belong. I've seen the violence, the cruelty. I won't bring that down on you for $1 a week and a place to sleep. Caleb met her eyes, and she saw steel beneath the grief. I appreciate your concern, but this is my ranch, my land, and my choice. If someone has a problem with who I hire, they can take it up with me. You want the work or not? It was pride that almost made her refuse. Pride and fear and the certainty that this arrangement would end badly for one or both of them. But beneath the pride was desperation, and beneath the fear was a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could rest long enough to figure out what came next. I want the work, she said quietly, but I have conditions. Name them. I sleep in the barn. I won't stay in the house. That'll just give people more ammunition. Agreed. I do my share of the work, but I'm not your maid. We split the labor fare. Fair enough. And if the town comes with torches and pitchforks, you don't try to be a hero. You let me leave and save yourself the trouble. Caleb frowned at that. That's not a condition I can agree to. Then we don't have a deal. They stared at each other, wills clashing in the quiet kitchen. Finally, Caleb sighed. How about this? If real trouble comes, we'll face it together and make decisions together. I won't play hero without your say-so, but you don't get to run off without mine either. Deal? Taya considered this. It was more than she'd expected, this mutual respect, this acknowledgement that she had a say in her own fate. Deal. They shook hands, her small brown hand disappearing into his larger, calloused one. The gesture felt significant, binding, as if they were sealing something more important than just a work arrangement. When do I start? Taya asked. Now, if you're up for it. Chickens need feeding, and I need to ride out and check the north fence line. Had coyotes testing it last week. I can handle chickens. Good. Caleb grabbed his hat from a hook by the door. Feed's in the barrel by the coop. They get about 2 handfuls each, scattered in the yard. Eggs are usually in the nesting boxes on the east side. Bring in what you find. We'll have them for dinner. Anything else? If you're feeling ambitious, the garden could use weeding. Rachel's vegetable patch is behind the house. Most of it's gone wild, but there's still some squash and beans fighting for survival. Do what you can, but don't overdo it. You're still recovering from your walk. Taya nodded, already cataloging the work in her mind. It felt good to have tasks, purpose, a reason to move through the day beyond simple survival. Caleb paused at the door. Miss Redbird? Thank you. For staying. For giving this a chance. I know it's a risk for you. It's a risk for both of us, Taya corrected, but maybe it's the kind of risk worth taking. He smiled, a real smile this time, not just a ghost of one. Rachel would have liked you. Then he was gone, striding across the yard toward the barn where his horse waited. Taya watched him go, then turned to look at the kitchen, the house, the life she'd just agreed to share the edges of. It wasn't much. It wasn't permanent. But it was something. And something was more than she'd had yesterday. She found an apron hanging on a hook, Rachel's probably, and after a moment's hesitation put it on. Then she went to meet the chickens. The work was harder than Taya had expected, but in a good way, the kind of hard that made muscles burn and sweat form and thoughts quiet down to nothing but the task at hand. The chickens were bossy and opinionated, squawking at her for being late with their breakfast, pecking at her feet if she didn't scatter the feed fast enough. She found 7 eggs in the nesting boxes, still warm, and carried them carefully back to the house in her apron. The garden was a battlefield. Rachel's orderly rows had been overtaken by weeds that grew with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm only desert plants could manage. But beneath the chaos, Taya found life. Tomato plants heavy with fruit, bean vines winding stubbornly upward, squash leaves spreading wide despite the competition. She knelt in the dirt and began to pull weeds, working slowly, methodically, letting the sun warm her back and the earth ground her. It had been so long since she'd done simple work like this. The past months had been all about movement, about survival, about staying ahead of whatever was chasing her. But here, in this patch of soil behind a stranger's house, she could just be, just work, just exist without constantly looking over her shoulder. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear the horse approaching until it was almost upon her. Taya spun around, startled, her hand instinctively moving to her belt where a knife would have been if she'd had one. But it wasn't Caleb returning. It was a stranger, a man on a dark horse wearing a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. He pulled up short when he saw her, his eyes widening. "Well, didn't expect to find anyone here but Caleb." Taya stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands onto the apron. She said nothing, just watched him, waiting to see what kind of man he was. The sheriff dismounted, looping his horse's reins over the porch rail. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that took in everything. Her presence, her posture, the work she'd been doing. "I'm Sheriff Ezra Pike. You must be the woman the town's been talking about. Word travels fast. Small town, not much happens. When something does, people notice." He tilted his head. "You got a name?" "Taya Redbird. Miss Redbird." He nodded as if filing the information away. "Mrs. Pritchard mentioned you came through yesterday, that she sent you out here to Caleb's place. Wanted to make sure you'd arrived safely." There was something in the way he said it. Not quite accusation, not quite concern, but something in between. Taya chose her words carefully. "Mr. Holt was kind enough to offer me water and a place to sleep. This morning, he offered me work. I accepted." Pike's eyebrows rose. "Work? Here. Is that a problem, Sheriff?" "Problem? No. Surprising? Yes. Caleb Holt hasn't let anyone step foot on this property in 2 years, let alone hired someone to help out." He glanced around the yard. "Place does need the help, though. Man can't keep up a ranch alone." "Then everyone should be happy he's found assistance." Pike smiled slightly at that. "You'd think, but this is Silver Creek, and people here don't always think the way they should." He crossed his arms. "I'm going to be straight with you, Miss Redbird. There's going to be talk. Some folks aren't going to like seeing you here. They're going to have opinions, and those opinions aren't going to be kind." "I'm used to unkind opinions, Sheriff." "I'm sure you are. But Caleb, he's not used to being the subject of them. He's been the town hermit, the grieving widower everyone leaves alone. This changes that, changes how people see him." "Then maybe people should mind their own business." Pike laughed, a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "You've got spine, I'll give you that." His expression sobered. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble or chase you off. Hell, I think it's about time someone shook this town up a little. But I am here to tell you that if there is trouble, and there might be, you come to me. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't give them an excuse to escalate. Understand?" Taya studied him, trying to read beneath the words. "You're saying you'll help? If it comes to that?" "I'm saying the law's the law, and it applies to everyone, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. That's not a popular stance around here, but it's my stance." He settled his hat more firmly on his head. "Where's Caleb?" "Checking fence lines. North pasture, I think." "I'll catch up with him." Pike moved toward his horse, then paused. "Miss Redbird, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing taking this job. And I think Caleb did the right thing, offering it. Sometimes the right thing's the hard thing, but that doesn't make it less right." "Thank you, Sheriff." He nodded and swung up into his saddle. "I'll be around. You need anything? You know where to find me." Then he rode off toward the north pasture, leaving Taya alone with her thoughts, and a slowly growing sense that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in Silver Creek was going to be an enemy. She returned to the garden, but her mind was elsewhere now. The sheriff's visit had been friendly enough, but it confirmed what she already knew. Her presence here was going to cause ripples. The question was whether those ripples would settle into calm water or build into a storm. Caleb returned an hour later, riding in with Sheriff Pike beside him. They were talking in low voices, and both looked serious. Taya watched them from the garden, trying not to appear too interested, but Caleb caught her eye and gestured for her to join them. She walked over slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Sheriff Pike says the town's buzzing," Caleb said without preamble. "Multiple people saw you arrive yesterday, saw you rejected at various doors, saw where you ended up. By this morning, half of Silver Creek was convinced I'd either thrown you off the property or—" He trailed off, uncomfortable. "Or what?" Taya demanded. Pike cleared his throat. "Or done something inappropriate. People have active imaginations when it comes to situations they don't understand." "So what do we do?" Caleb asked. "Nothing," Taya said firmly. "We do nothing. I work, you pay me, and what anyone else thinks is their problem." "It's not that simple," Pike said. "People are going to want answers. They're going to ask questions. And if you don't give them something, they'll make up their own stories." "What kind of answers?" Caleb's voice was sharp. "The official kind. A work contract. Something that makes this arrangement legitimate. Papers that say Miss Redbird is employed here in a legal capacity with proper wages and terms." Pike shrugged. "I know it sounds bureaucratic, but it gives you protection. Gives you both protection." Taya and Caleb exchanged glances. "You think people will actually care about a piece of paper?" Taya asked. "I think people care about propriety," Pike said. "And in this town, propriety means paperwork. You sign a contract in front of witnesses, file it with me as an official employment agreement, and suddenly this becomes a business arrangement instead of whatever else they want to imagine." "I'll do it," Caleb said, "if Miss Redbird's willing." "I'm willing," Taya said, "but I want something clear on that paper. I can leave any time I want. This isn't indentured servitude." "Of course not," Pike said quickly. "I'll draw up something fair. Both parties can terminate the agreement with 1 week's notice. How's that?" "Fine," Caleb said. "Good. I'll bring the papers by tomorrow. In the meantime," Pike looked between them. "Be visible. Work where people can see you if they ride by. Don't give anyone ammunition to claim something improper is happening. Keep things professional." "We are professional," Taya said coldly. "I know that, but the town doesn't. Not yet." Pike mounted his horse. "Caleb, you might want to come into town yourself in the next day or two. Show your face. Let people see you're fine, that you're still the same man you were before. It'll help calm things down." Caleb nodded reluctantly. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. The longer you hide out here, the more stories people will invent." Pike tipped his hat to both of them. "Take care. Both of you." They watched him ride away, dust rising from his horse's hooves. "Well," Caleb said after a long moment. "That was interesting." "He seems like a decent man," Taya offered. "He is. Known as Rapike for years. He's fair, even when fair isn't popular." Caleb looked at her. "You sure you want to go through with this? The contract, the official arrangement? It's going to tie you here, at least in people's minds." "I'm already tied here," Taya said. "At least this way, I'm tied legally, instead of just by gossip." She met his eyes. "Unless you're having second thoughts?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "No second thoughts. If we're doing this, we do it right. Papers, contracts, everything above board. I won't have anyone questioning your character or mine. Then we sign papers tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Caleb agreed. They stood there for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over them. They were no longer just a desperate woman and a grieving widower who'd stumbled into an arrangement. They were becoming something more formal, more permanent, more visible. And with that visibility would come scrutiny, judgment, and danger. But looking at Caleb's determined face, seeing the steel in his spine despite the grief that still haunted his eyes, Taya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe not everything in this world was designed to break her. Maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could stand her ground and fight for the right to exist on her own terms. "I should get back to the garden," she said. "And I should fix that section of fence I found. Coyotes chewed right through it." Caleb started to walk away. then turned back. Taya, thank you for not running when Pike showed up, for not taking the easy way out. There is no easy way out, Taya said. Not for people like me. So I might as well make my stand somewhere it matters. Caleb smiled at that. A sad smile, but genuine. Rachel would have said the same thing. Then he walked toward the barn to get his tools, and Taya returned to the garden, and the day continued in the way of days on a ranch, work punctuated by brief moments of rest, sweat and dirt, and the satisfaction of tasks completed. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of labor, something was building. A story was beginning in Silver Creek, one that would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. A story about $3 and a basin of water and the door that opened when all others had closed. A story about what it costs to be decent in an indecent world, and whether that cost is worth paying. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the ranch with relentless heat. Taya worked until her back ached and her hands were raw, but she didn't stop. This was her place now, earned with sweat and determination. This was her stand, and she would hold it no matter what came next. The next morning arrived with the kind of bright, merciless sunlight that turned everything sharp and clear. Taya was already awake when Caleb emerged from the house, having spent the pre-dawn hours mending a tear in her dress by lantern light in the barn. She'd learned long ago that idle hands made room for doubt, and doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was feeding the chickens when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her hand stilled mid-scatter, seeds falling from her fingers as she turned toward the road. 3 riders were coming up the drive, Sheriff Pike in the lead, followed by 2 men Taya didn't recognize. One was elderly, thin as a rail with white hair visible beneath his hat. The other was younger, perhaps 30, with the careful posture of someone who worked with books rather than cattle. Caleb emerged from the barn, hammer in hand, and stopped when he saw the visitors. His jaw tightened, but he walked forward to meet them, and Taya found herself moving to stand beside him without consciously deciding to do so. "Morning, Ezra," Caleb said, his tone neutral. "Caleb, Miss Redbird." Pike dismounted, and the other 2 men followed suit. "Brought the papers like I said I would. This here is Judge Aldrich Morrison. He's the one who'll make everything official. And this is Daniel Worth, town clerk. He'll file the documents once they're signed." Judge Morrison had the kind of face that had seen everything and been impressed by very little. He studied Taya with sharp eyes that missed nothing, then turned the same scrutiny on Caleb. "This is the arrangement you want to formalize? Employment of Miss Redbird as a ranch hand?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "Full-time work with room and board plus monetary compensation?" "That's right." "And you, Miss Redbird?" The judge's attention swung back to her. "This is your choice? No coercion? No pressure?" Taya met his gaze steadily. "My choice, sir. Mr. Holt offered me work. I accepted. That's all there is to it." "That's all there is to it," Morrison repeated, as if tasting the words. "If only things were ever that simple." He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "I've drafted a standard employment contract. Mr. Worth, if you'd be so kind as to read it aloud for all parties." The clerk, Worth, took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. He cleared his throat and began to read in a voice that was surprisingly strong for such a nervous-looking man. The contract was straightforward. Taya Redbird would be employed by Caleb Holt as a general ranch hand, performing duties including but not limited to animal husbandry, property maintenance, cooking, and general household assistance. In exchange, she would receive room and board plus $1 per week in monetary wages. Either party could terminate the agreement with 1 week's written notice. The term would be indefinite, reviewed annually. "Any objections to these terms?" Morrison asked when Worth finished reading. "None," Caleb said. "None," Taya echoed. "Then we'll need signatures from both parties, plus witnesses." Morrison produced a pen and ink from his saddlebag with the efficiency of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. He laid the contract on a flat section of the porch railing. "Mr. Holt, if you please." Caleb signed his name with steady strokes. Caleb James Holt, the letters clear and precise. Then he handed the pen to Taya. She took it, feeling the weight of the moment. Her hand hovered over the paper for just a second before she signed. Taya Redbird, smaller and more careful than Caleb's bold script, but no less certain. Witnesses, Morrison said, and Pike and Worth both added their signatures below. Morrison took the document, examined it carefully, then nodded. Legally binding as of this date, October 10th, 1885. Mr. Worth will file this with the county records. Sheriff Pike keeps a copy for local reference, and you each get a copy for your own records. He looked between them. This makes your arrangement official in the eyes of the law. Anyone who has questions can be directed to the public record. Thank you, Judge, Caleb said. Morrison folded his copy of the contract carefully. You should know that I did this because I believe in the letter of the law, Mr. Holt. Every person has the right to work, and every property owner has the right to hire whom they choose. But you should also know that belief in the law and popular opinion are often two very different things. I'm aware of that, sir. Are you? Morrison's gaze sharpened. Because what you've done here, it's going to cause talk. It already has. By making it official, you've made it impossible to ignore. Some folks are going to see this as a challenge to their way of thinking. Others are going to see it as an opportunity to cause trouble. Let them try, Caleb said, his voice hard. Bold words. I hope you can back them up. Morrison mounted his horse with the stiffness of age. Miss Redbird, I hope this arrangement proves beneficial for you, and I hope it doesn't bring you more hardship than you've already endured. I can handle hardship, Judge, Taya said quietly. I believe you can. The question is whether you should have to. He tipped his hat. Good day to you both. The three men rode away, leaving Caleb and Taya standing in the yard with the morning sun beating down and the weight of official recognition settling over them like a cloak. Well, Caleb said after a long silence. It's done. It's done, Taya agreed. She looked down at her copy of the contract, at her name written in ink that would outlast memory. Does it feel different, being official? Feels more permanent, more real. He glanced at her. Any regrets? Ask me again in a week. That pulled a laugh from him. Brief, but genuine. Fair enough. Come on. If we're officially employer and employee now, I should probably show you the rest of what needs doing around here. He led her on a tour of the property, pointing out fences that needed repair, a water pump that stuck in dry weather, a section of roof on the barn that leaked when it rained. The list of work was endless, the kind of backlog that accumulated when one person tried to maintain what two had built together. Rachel and I bought this place 6 years ago, Caleb said as they walked along the eastern fence line. It was nothing but scrub land and hope. We built that house with our own hands, well, with help from her father and brother, but mostly us. Took us 8 months. Every nail, every board, every stone in that fireplace. She designed the whole thing, drew it out on paper. Said she wanted a home, not just a house. Somewhere that felt like it was growing out of the land rather than sitting on top of it. Taya listened, hearing the love and loss in every word. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Caleb ran his hand along the fence post, testing its stability. Smart as a whip, tougher than leather, and kinder than anyone I ever met. She could outwork any man on the ranch, then turn around and quote poetry while making dinner. Never understood what she saw in me, to be honest. Maybe she saw what I see, Taya said before she could stop herself. Caleb looked at her, surprised. And what's that? A good man trying to do right in a world that doesn't always reward it. She felt her face heat, wishing she'd kept her mouth shut. Anyway, this fence post is loose. We should fix it before the whole section comes down. If Caleb noticed her deflection, he didn't call attention to it. They worked together in comfortable silence, digging out the old post and setting a new one, tamping down the earth until it stood solid and straight. The physical labor was good. It gave them something to focus on besides the complicated reality of their situation. They were finishing up when they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Caleb straightened, wariness crossing his face. That's the supply wagon from town. Usually comes on Wednesdays, but it's only Tuesday. The wagon came into view, driven by a heavy-set man with a florid face and suspicious eyes. He pulled up about 20 feet away, making no move to come closer. "Holt," the man said, his voice cold. "Mr. Brennan," Caleb replied, equally cold. "You're a day early. Had time today, figured I'd make the run. Got your usual supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt. That'll be $8.30. Caleb walked toward the wagon, pulling money from his pocket. Same as always, then. Same as always. Brennan took the money, counted it carefully, then began unloading sacks and boxes onto the ground rather than bringing them to the porch as he usually did. His eyes kept drifting to Taya, who stood by the fence post, deliberately not approaching. Something on your mind, Brennan? Caleb asked, his tone dangerous. Heard you hired yourself some help. That's right. Heard it's that Apache woman been causing trouble in town. She didn't cause any trouble. Town caused its own trouble by turning away someone who needed help. Caleb's voice was hard as stone. And yes, I hired her. Got it made official yesterday with Judge Morrison. You got a problem with that? Brennan's face reddened further. Ain't my place to have problems with how other folks run their property. But I will say that not everyone in Silver Creek is going to be as understanding as I am. Understanding, Caleb repeated flatly. Is that what you call dropping my supplies in the dirt instead of bringing them to the house like you've done for 6 years? I call it caution. Don't know what diseases she might be carrying. Don't want to risk bringing anything back to town. The insult hung in the air like poison. Taya felt her hands clench into fists, felt rage surge up hot and familiar. She'd heard variations of this her entire life. The suggestion that her very existence was contaminating, that proximity to her was dangerous, that she was less than human. But before she could respond, Caleb moved. He crossed the distance between himself and Brennan in 3 long strides, grabbed the man by his shirt, and hauled him half off the wagon seat. You listen to me very carefully, Caleb said, his voice low and deadly. Miss Redbird is an employee of this ranch, legally contracted and properly hired. You will treat her with respect, or you will not be welcome on my property. And if I ever hear you suggest she's diseased or dangerous, or anything other than a woman trying to make an honest living, yes, we understand each other. Caleb released him, stepping back. Good. Now get off my land. Brennan didn't need to be told twice. He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, turning in a wide circle and heading back toward the road at a pace that suggested panic rather than haste. Caleb stood watching until the wagon disappeared, his chest heaving, his hands still clenched. Then he turned to Taya. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I've heard worse, she said, though her voice shook slightly. You didn't have to defend me. I can fight my own battles. I know you can. But you shouldn't have to. Not here. Not on this ranch. He walked over to the scattered supplies and began picking them up. Help me carry this stuff inside? They worked together, hauling flour and sugar and coffee into the house, neither speaking, but both processing what had just happened. When everything was stored away, Caleb poured them both water from the pump and they stood in the kitchen, drinking in silence. That's going to make things worse, Taya finally said. What you did. Brennan will tell everyone you manhandled him. They'll say you're being controlled by me, that I've bewitched you or corrupted you, or whatever story makes them feel better about their own prejudices. Let them say it. Caleb set down his cup. I'm tired of letting fear dictate how I live. These past 2 years I've hidden out here, avoided people, avoided conflict. I told myself it was grief, that I needed time. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of living without Rachel, scared of facing a world that had let her die. And that fear made me small. He looked at her. But you walked 70 miles with $3 and still had the courage to knock on one more door. If you can be that brave, then I can be brave enough to stand up to a bigot like Brennan. Taya felt something shift in her chest, some tightly held knot of tension beginning to loosen. You're a strange man, Caleb Holt. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. She smiled despite everything. Most men would have closed that door. Most men are idiots. That surprised a laugh out of her, real and unguarded. Can't argue with that. The moment of levity was interrupted by more approaching horses. This time it was a group, 5 riders coming fast up the drive, dust billowing behind them. Hell, Caleb muttered. That didn't take long. They walked out onto the porch together, standing side by side as the riders approached. Taya recognized one of them, the man who'd set his dog on her when she'd knocked on his door in town. The others were strangers, all cut from the same cloth, hard-faced men with righteous anger in their eyes. The group pulled up in front of the house, their horses stamping and snorting. The man with the dog spoke first, his voice carrying across the yard. "Caleb Holt, we need to talk." "Then talk, Garrison, but make it quick. We've got work to do." Garrison's face reddened at the dismissal. "You can't just hire some savage off the street and expect the town to accept it. This is a decent community. We have standards." "Standards like turning away someone who needed help? Standards like judging a person based on their blood rather than their character?" Caleb's voice was cold. "Those are standards I can do without." "You're being a fool," another man spoke up, older, with gray streaking his beard. "You think this ends well? You think keeping her here doesn't put a target on your back?" "The only people putting targets anywhere are the ones riding onto my property uninvited to threaten me." Caleb crossed his arms. "Miss Redbird is legally employed here. Contract signed and filed. If you've got a legal complaint, take it to Judge Morrison. Otherwise, get off my land." "Judge Morrison's a fool too, signing off on this," Garrison spat. "But that paper doesn't mean anything if we decide it doesn't." Taya felt her heart rate spike, felt the familiar taste of fear in her mouth. This was how it started. The casual threats, the suggestions of violence, the slow build towards something terrible. She'd seen it before, lived through it before. She opened her mouth to tell Caleb she'd leave, that she'd save them both the trouble. But before she could speak, another voice rang out across the yard. "That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Garrison. Please tell me I misheard you." Sheriff Pike rode into the yard from the direction of the south pasture, his horse moving at a deliberate walk. His hand rested casually on his gun belt, and his expression was mild, almost friendly. But there was steel underneath. "Just having a conversation, Sheriff," Garrison said, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Conversation. Right." Pike positioned his horse between the group and the porch. "Here's the thing about conversations. They involve two willing parties talking respectfully. What I saw looked more like 5 men attempting to intimidate 2 people on their own property. Now, I'm sure that's not what was happening, because if it was, I'd have to arrest all 5 of you for trespassing and threatening behavior." "We weren't threatening," the gray-bearded man started. "Then what were you doing?" Pike's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes were hard. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like you were trying to force Caleb to fire his legally contracted employee based on nothing but your own prejudices. And last I checked, that's not how the law works in this county." The 5 men exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing their earlier bravado. Apparently having the law on your side was one thing when the law wasn't physically present. It was quite another when Sheriff Pike was staring you down. "We're just concerned citizens, huh?" Garrison tried. "Then be concerned about actual crimes instead of making up problems where none exist." Pike shifted in his saddle. "Miss Redbird has broken no laws. Mr. Holt has broken no laws. Their employment arrangement is legal and proper. If you have complaints about it, you can file them through official channels. What you cannot do is form a mob and ride out here to intimidate them. Are we clear?" Silence stretched across the yard. Finally, Garrison jerked his horse's head around. "This isn't over, Holt." "Yes, it is," Pike said firmly. "It's over right now, unless you'd like to continue this conversation in a jail cell." The 5 men rode away, their earlier aggression deflated but not eliminated, just redirected, pushed underground where it would fester and grow. Taya watched them go, feeling the weight of inevitability settling over her. This was just the beginning, the first confrontation of many. Pike dismounted and walked over to the porch. "You two all right?" "Fine," Caleb said. "How did you know to come?" "Brennan came racing into town talking about how you'd assaulted him. I figured it was exaggeration, but I also figured it might stir up trouble, so I rode out to check." He glanced in the direction the riders had gone. "Glad I did." "Thank you," Taya said quietly, "for intervening." "Just doing my job, Miss Redbird. Keeping the peace means protecting everyone, not just the people who look or think a certain way." He turned to Caleb. "But I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to escalate. Garrison and his friends, they're not going to let this go. They see your arrangement with Miss Redbird as a threat to their worldview and threaten people do dangerous things." "What do you suggest?" Caleb asked. "Be visible. Come into town, both of you. Show your faces. Let people see that this is a normal, professional arrangement. Let them see Miss Redbird working, being competent, being human. It's harder to hate someone when they're real instead of abstract. I don't know if that's a good idea, Taya said. Every time I've shown my face in Silver Creek, it's ended badly. That's because you were asking for help, and help is something people can refuse. But this is different. You're not asking for anything. You're just existing, working, living your life. That's harder to reject. Pike looked between them. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying people will suddenly welcome you with open arms. But silence and hiding only feed fear. Visibility fights it. Caleb considered this. When? Saturday. Market day. The whole town will be there. Come in for supplies. Walk through the market. Be seen together. Show them this is real and it's not going away. And if they try something? Taya asked. I'll be there, Pike said simply. And I'll make sure a few other level-headed folks are around too. Clara Pritchard, for one. She's been talking to some of the church ladies, trying to shift opinion. Judge Morrison will be visible. We'll create a safe space for you to exist in public. It was a gamble, Taya knew, walking into the lion's den hoping the lions would be too civilized to attack. But Pike was right about one thing. Hiding wouldn't make the problem go away. It would only make it worse, turn her into a ghost story that people could shape into whatever monster they wanted. I'll do it, she said, if Caleb's willing. I'm willing, Caleb said, but on one condition, at the first sign of real trouble, we leave. I won't put Taya at risk just to make a point. Agreed, Pike said. Saturday then, 10 o'clock? I'll meet you at the north end of Main Street, escort you through personally. After Pike left, Caleb and Taya stood on the porch, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. The day had been eventful in ways neither of them had anticipated, and evening couldn't come fast enough. You don't have to do this, Caleb said quietly. Go into town on Saturday. Face them all. You could stay here. Let me handle the public part. And prove them right? That I'm hiding, ashamed, afraid? Taya shook her head. No. If we're doing this, we do it together. Face them together. You're braver than I am. I'm more desperate than you are. There's a difference. I don't think there is. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Taya, why did you really come to Silver Creek? You said you were running from something, but you never said what. She'd known this question would come eventually. The real question was how much truth to share. She looked out at the darkening prairie, at the vast emptiness that had swallowed so much of her life, and decided that this man, this strange, grieving, decent man, deserved honesty. I was married once, she said, the words coming slowly, painfully, to a man from my mother's village. His name was Nawel. We were young, barely 20, but we loved each other the way young people do, completely, blindly, certain we were invincible. She paused, gathering strength. We tried to build a life, tried to farm a piece of land the government said we could have, tried to exist in a world that didn't want us to exist. For 2 years, we survived. Barely, but we survived. What happened? Caleb's voice was gentle. White settlers wanted our land, said we were squatting even though we had papers, had paid fees, had done everything legally. They went to the territorial governor, got him to invalidate our claim. When we refused to leave, they came with guns. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless, the only way she could tell this story. They killed Nahuel, shot him in front of me. Then they burned our house, our crops, everything we'd built. Told me if I didn't leave by sunrise, they'd kill me too. God, Taya, I'm so sorry. I walked away with the clothes on my back and $3 silver I'd hidden in my boot. That was 8 months ago. I've been moving ever since, trying to find somewhere I could stop, could rest, could breathe without looking over my shoulder. She finally looked at him. Your ranch is the first place that's felt like it might be safe. But I understand if knowing my history changes things. If you want me to leave, I don't want you to leave, Caleb interrupted firmly. What happened to you? What they did? That's not your shame to carry. That's theirs. And if any of those men ever show their faces here, they'll regret it. Taya felt tears threaten and blinked them back. You can't protect me from the whole world, Caleb. Maybe not, but I can protect you here, on this land, and I can stand beside you when we face that town on Saturday. That's not nothing. No, she agreed softly. That's not nothing. They stood together as night fell completely, Two broken people trying to build something whole from the pieces they had left. The road ahead would be difficult, that much was certain. Saturday would test them both in ways they couldn't predict. And beyond Saturday lay weeks, months, maybe years of fighting for the right to simply exist without apology. But in this moment, on this porch, with stars beginning to appear overhead and the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and possibility, they had something neither had possessed in a long time. They had hope, and they had each other's backs. It would have to be enough. The days between Tuesday and Saturday moved with the strange duality of passing both too quickly and too slowly. Each morning, Taya woke in the barn loft to the sound of roosters and the knowledge that she was one day closer to walking back into Silver Creek. Not as a desperate stranger begging for help, but as someone with a right to be there. The difference should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt terrifying. She threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. If she was going to face that town, she would do it with calloused hands and sun-darkened skin that proved she'd earned her place here. She mended every section of fence she could find. She weeded the garden until not a single intruder plant remained. She organized the barn, repaired leather tack that had been neglected, and even fixed the leak in the roof that Caleb had mentioned, climbing up despite his protests that it was too dangerous. "You're going to break your neck," he called up to her as she balanced on the pitched roof, hammering new shingles into place. "I've climbed worse," she called back, and it was true. The barn roof was nothing compared to the cliff faces she'd scaled as a child, following her grandmother to gather herbs that grew only in high places. Caleb stood below, hands on his hips, ready to catch her if she fell. "You don't have to prove anything, you know. I already hired you." "I'm not proving anything to you." She hammered another nail home with more force than necessary. "I'm proving it to myself." He seemed to understand that and said nothing more, just stayed there as her safety net until she climbed back down. They worked side by side in a rhythm that grew more natural each day, him showing her how he wanted things done, her absorbing the information, and often suggesting improvements based on methods she'd learned from her own people. At first he'd been hesitant to accept her changes, but after she'd reorganized the tool shed in a way that made everything more accessible, he'd started listening more carefully. "Your people have different ways of doing things," he observed one afternoon as they worked together to repair a water trough. "Efficient ways." "We've had to be efficient," Taya said, mixing clay and water to seal a crack. "When you're constantly being pushed onto smaller and worse land, you learn to make everything count. No wasted motion, no wasted materials." Rachel would have liked that philosophy. She was always after me to be more organized, more intentional. He paused in his work. "I think she would have liked you too. You've got the same kind of steel in your spine she had." It was the highest compliment he could have given, and Taya felt it settle warm in her chest. "Thank you." They finished the trough in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that came from people learning to work as a team rather than as strangers forced together by circumstance. Wednesday evening, Clara Pritchard arrived unannounced, driving a small cart pulled by an elderly mule. Taya was in the garden when she heard the approach and immediately tensed, but Caleb emerged from the house and waved her over. "It's all right," he called. "It's just Clara." Taya approached cautiously as the older woman climbed down from her cart with surprising agility. Clara Pritchard was somewhere in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. She'd been the one to direct Taya to Caleb's ranch in the first place, and Taya wasn't sure whether to thank her or resent her for it. "Miss Redbird," Clara said, her voice brisk and businesslike. "I'm glad to see you're still here and apparently thriving. Caleb, you look better than you have in 2 years. Actual color in your face. Remarkable what having another human being around can do." "Clara," Caleb said, a warning note in his voice. "What brings you out here?" "Business, of course. I don't make social calls." She pulled a bundle wrapped in brown paper from her cart. "Saturday is market day, as you well know. Miss Redbird, you cannot go into town wearing that dress." Taya looked down at her worn cotton dress, the one she'd been wearing when she arrived and had washed twice since. It was threadbare in places, patched in others, and had been faded by sun and hard living long before she'd come to Silver Creek. "It's all I have." "I'm aware. Which is why I've brought you this." Clara thrust the bundle into Taya's hands. "It was my daughter's. She moved to San Francisco 3 years ago and left half her wardrobe behind. This should fit you. You're about the same size she was at your age. Taya unwrapped the paper slowly, revealing a dress of deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers printed on it. It had long sleeves, a high collar, and a full skirt that would fall to her ankles. It was simple, modest, and infinitely nicer than anything Taya had owned in years. "I can't accept this," she said, trying to hand it back. "It's too much." "Nonsense. It's a dress, not the crown jewels. And you'll be doing me a favor by taking it. Been cluttering up my spare room for far too long." Clara's expression softened slightly. "Besides, if you're going to walk into Silver Creek on Saturday, you need to look like you belong there. Fair or not, people judge by appearances. Give them one less thing to criticize." Taya held the dress, feeling the quality of the fabric, the care that had gone into its making. "Why are you helping me? You turned me away from your boarding house." "I did, and I'm not proud of it," Clara said bluntly. "I let fear of losing business override my conscience. But I've been thinking about what you said, that you only wanted water, a moment to wash. Such a small thing to ask, and I couldn't even give you that. It's been eating at me." She met Taya's eyes. "I can't undo that choice, but I can make different choices going forward. Hence the dress. And hence this." She pulled out a second bundle, smaller this time. Inside was a bonnet, pale cream with a blue ribbon that would match the dress perfectly. "Clara, this is too generous," Caleb protested. "It's not generous, it's strategic," Clara corrected. "Saturday is going to be difficult enough without adding fashion concerns to the mix. Miss Redbird needs to look respectable, employed, and entirely appropriate. This will help." She fixed Caleb with a stern look. "And you need a haircut and a shave. You look like a mountain man. If people are going to gossip, don't give them ammunition by appearing uncivilized." Despite the tension of the upcoming Saturday, Taya found herself fighting a smile. Clara Pritchard was a force of nature, and apparently she'd decided to deploy that force on their behalf. "I'll get cleaned up," Caleb said, properly chastened. "See that you do. And both of you, when you come to town, walk tall, look people in the eye, and don't apologize for existing. The moment you act ashamed is the moment they've won." Clara climbed back into her cart with the same efficiency she'd descended from it. "Sheriff Pike and I will meet you at the north end of Main Street, 10 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." She drove away before either of them could thank her properly, leaving Taya standing in the yard holding a dress that represented something she'd almost stopped believing in. The possibility that not everyone in Silver Creek had a heart made of stone. That evening, Taya tried on the dress in the privacy of the barn. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She turned slowly in front of the small mirror Caleb had brought out, barely recognizing herself. She looked like a woman with a place in the world, with dignity and purpose. She looked like someone who belonged. The realization made her throat tight with emotion. When was the last time she'd looked at herself and seen something other than a survivor, a refugee, someone always on the edge of disaster? The dress couldn't change her circumstances, couldn't erase her history or guarantee her future, but it gave her armor, and right now she needed all the armor she could get. Thursday brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Daniel Worth, the nervous town clerk who'd witnessed the contract signing. He arrived mid-morning, alone, riding a horse that looked as skittish as its owner. "Mr. Holt, Miss Redbird," he said, dismounting with the careful movements of someone not entirely comfortable on horseback. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Caleb said, though his posture suggested otherwise. "What brings you out here, Mr. Worth?" Worth pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag. "I wanted to deliver your official copies of the employment contract. They're properly filed now, registered with the county. Everything legal and above board." He handed documents to both Caleb and Taya. "I also wanted to give you fair warning. There's been talk of a petition." "What kind of petition?" Taya asked, dread settling in her stomach. "A petition to invalidate employment contracts between white property owners and Indian workers. Some folks are trying to get enough signatures to pressure Judge Morrison into declaring such arrangements illegal." Worth's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm not signing it for what it's worth. Neither are several others, but Garrison and his allies are pushing hard." "Can they do that?" Caleb demanded. "Can they just make our contract illegal after the fact?" "Not easily. and not without a lengthy legal process. Judge Morrison has already said he won't entertain such a petition, says it violates both territorial and federal law. But that doesn't mean they won't try to make life difficult through other means. Worth adjusted his spectacles nervously. I thought you should know what you're walking into on Saturday. We appreciate the warning, Taya said quietly. Worth nodded, mounted his horse with visible relief at being able to leave, then paused. Miss Redbird, for what it's worth, I think you deserve to work wherever you're wanted, and I think Caleb's a good man for giving you that chance. Don't let the small mines in Silver Creek convince you otherwise. He rode away quickly, as if afraid he'd said too much. Caleb watched him go, then turned to Taya with grim determination in his eyes. They're going to fight us every step of the way. Yes, Taya agreed, they are. Are you still willing to go on Saturday? She looked down at the contract in her hands, official, legal, binding. Her name and Caleb's, witnessed and filed. Proof that she had a right to be here, even if half the town disagreed. More than ever, she said. If they're trying this hard to push us out before we even show our faces, imagine how much it'll bother them when we do. That pulled a fierce grin from Caleb. Rachel used to say that the best response to bullies was to refuse to be bullied. Looks like you've got the same philosophy. Your wife was a wise woman. She really was. Friday arrived with heavy clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. Taya spent the morning helping Caleb with the more physically demanding work, moving hay bales, reinforcing the barn's support beams, clearing drainage ditches. She pushed herself hard, partly to prepare for tomorrow's ordeal, partly to quiet the anxiety that kept threatening to overwhelm her. They worked through lunch, grabbing bread and cheese when they had time, washing it down with water from the pump. The physical exhaustion was good. It left less energy for worry. In the late afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds and painted everything gold, Caleb called a halt. Enough! We've done more in 1 week than I managed in the last month. You need to rest before tomorrow. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running yourself ragged. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Come on, let's sit for a minute. They settled on the porch steps, both dirty and exhausted, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains. The silence between them had evolved over the week from awkward to comfortable to something approaching companionable. They'd learned each other's rhythms, each other's silences. I'm scared, Taya admitted quietly. About tomorrow. So am I. She looked at him in surprise. You are? Terrified. I haven't been to town for a market day in over a year. Haven't faced that many people at once since Rachel's funeral. And that was bad enough without adding the controversy we're bringing. He leaned back against the porch post. But fear isn't a good enough reason not to do something. Rachel taught me that too. She taught you a lot of things. She did. And one of the last things she said, when the fever was really bad, when she was barely conscious, she grabbed my hand and said, Don't let them make you small, Caleb. Don't let them convince you that kindness is weakness or that love is foolish. Be big, be brave, be better than they are. His voice cracked slightly. I've been failing that command for 2 years, but tomorrow I'm going to try to do better. Taya reached out and took his hand, a gesture that felt both natural and monumentally significant. His hand was rough with calluses, warm, strong. He squeezed her fingers gently. We'll be brave together, she said. That's easier than being brave alone. Much easier. They sat like that as the sun set, hands linked, two people preparing to face a hostile world with nothing but their conviction that they had a right to exist. It wasn't much armor against the hatred they would face, but it was something, and sometimes something was enough. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that promised winter was coming but hadn't quite arrived yet. Taya woke before sunrise, too anxious to sleep, and took extra care with her preparations. She washed thoroughly using water she'd heated on the small stove Caleb had set up in the barn. She combed her long dark hair until it shone, then braided it carefully and coiled the braid at the nape of her neck in the style she'd seen white women wear. She put on the blue dress Clara had given her, fumbling slightly with the buttons. It had been so long since she'd worn anything this nice. When she finally emerged from the barn, Caleb was waiting on the porch, and she barely recognized him. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline that had been hidden by 2 years of beard. He'd cut his hair, or had someone cut it. It was short and neat, combed back from his face. He wore clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, a vest, and a jacket that looked like it had been stored carefully and brought out for special occasions. He stared at her as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Do I look acceptable?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You look—" He seemed to struggle for words. "You look like you could walk into any drawing room in the territory and belong there." Clara chose well. "You clean up pretty well yourself." "I clean up like a man trying not to embarrass his employee," he corrected, but there was humor in his voice. "Ready?" "No, but we're going anyway." They hitched up Caleb's horse to a small cart, easier than both riding and more practical for hauling supplies back from town. The drive to Silver Creek took 40 minutes, and they spent most of it in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. As they approached the town, Taya could see it properly for the first time. On her first visit, she'd been too desperate and exhausted to pay attention to details. Now she took it in with clear eyes. A main street lined with wooden buildings, some painted, some raw timber weathering to gray. A general store, a bank, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, various other businesses she couldn't identify from a distance. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their Saturday business, unaware that their day was about to be disrupted. "There's Pike," Caleb said, pointing ahead. Sheriff Pike waited at the north end of Main Street, mounted on his horse, with Clara Pritchard standing beside him in a cart of her own. As Caleb pulled up beside them, Taya saw that several other people had gathered as well. Daniel Worth, looking nervous but determined. Judge Morrison, seated in a chair someone had brought out, his presence a statement of official sanction, and several women Taya didn't recognize, all wearing their Sunday best despite it being Saturday. "Right on time," Pike said approvingly. "Caleb, Miss Redbird, you both look very presentable. Are you ready?" "As ready as we'll ever be," Caleb said. "Then here's how this is going to work," Pike began, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "We're going to walk down Main Street together. All of us. Caleb and Miss Redbird in the lead, myself and Clara flanking, the others following. We'll stop at the general store first, conduct normal business, then proceed through the market. The goal is visibility and normalcy. We're not here to provoke, but we're also not here to hide." "What if someone tries to start trouble?" Taya asked. "Then I handle it," Pike said firmly. "That's my job. Your job is to hold your head high and show this town that you're not going anywhere." Clara climbed down from her cart and walked over to Taya. "Remember what I said. Walk tall. Look people in the eye. You have every right to be here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Taya nodded, drawing strength from the older woman's conviction. They began their procession down Main Street. Caleb and Taya walked side by side, not touching but close enough that their solidarity was visible. Pike rode slowly on Caleb's right, Clara drove her cart on Taya's left, and the others followed behind like an honor guard. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People on the boardwalks froze, staring. A woman grabbed her child and pulled him behind her skirts as if Taya were dangerous. A man spat on the ground, his disgust palpable. But others, a surprising number of others, simply watched with curiosity rather than hostility. "Keep walking," Pike said quietly. "Eyes forward." They passed the saloon, where several men had emerged to watch. Taya recognized Garrison among them, his face twisted with anger. He started to step off the boardwalk, moving as if to block their path, but Pike shifted his horse slightly, positioning himself between Garrison and Taya. "Morning, Garrison," Pike said pleasantly. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" Garrison's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't advance further. The presence of the sheriff, the judge, and several respectable townswomen created a barrier he apparently wasn't willing to cross. He stepped back onto the boardwalk, but his eyes followed them with undisguised hatred. They reached the general store, and Caleb helped Taya down from the cart. Her legs felt shaky, but she forced them to be steady. Together, they climbed the steps to the store entrance. The proprietor, a different man than the one who'd rejected Taya on her first visit, stood behind the counter, his expression carefully neutral. "Caleb, what can I do for you?" "Morning, Jim. Need the usual supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt. Maybe some dried beans and rice if you've got fresh stock. Caleb's voice was steady, normal, as if this were any ordinary shopping trip. Jim's eyes flicked to Taya, then away. Sure thing. Give me a minute to gather it up. While Jim collected supplies, Taya forced herself to look around the store. It was well-stocked, organized, clearly successful. Other customers had been shopping when they entered, and all of them had gone silent, watching. A young woman with a baby on her hip. An elderly man examining tools. A middle-aged couple near the fabric section. The young woman was the first to break the silence. "That's a beautiful dress," she said softly, addressing Taya directly. Taya turned, surprised. "Thank you. The color suits you. Brings out the warmth in your skin." The young woman smiled tentatively. "I'm Margaret Foster. This is my son, Thomas." Taya Redbird. The introduction felt monumental, this simple exchange of names in a public space. "I know who you are. Whole town's been talking about you." Margaret shifted the baby to her other hip. "For what it's worth, I think what Mr. Holt did, giving you work, was Christian. More Christian than most folks in this town have been." "Margaret!" the middle-aged woman hissed from across the store. "Don't encourage this." "I'll encourage whatever I like, Mother," Margaret replied, her voice strengthening. "We're supposed to help those in need, aren't we? That's what the preacher says every Sunday. Miss Redbird was in need and Mr. Holt helped. I don't see what's complicated about that." The middle-aged woman's face reddened, but she said nothing more. The elderly man examining tools cleared his throat. "Girl's got a point, Martha. Hospitality's supposed to be a virtue, last I checked." Jim returned with the supplies, his expression still carefully neutral. "That'll be $7.60, Caleb." Caleb paid, and Jim counted the change with meticulous care. As he handed it back, he said quietly, "I heard about the petition Garrison's pushing. I didn't sign it. Won't sign it either. Man's got a right to hire who he wants on his own land." "I appreciate that, Jim," Caleb said. They carried the supplies outside where Pike was waiting. Clara had moved her cart closer, and she helped load the purchases with brisk efficiency. "First stop successful," she murmured. "Margaret Foster speaking up, that was good. She's well liked, and her opinion carries weight with some of the younger families." "I didn't expect support," Taya admitted. "Never underestimate the power of basic decency," Clara replied. "It's buried under fear in a lot of people, but it's there. Sometimes it just needs permission to surface." They continued through the market, a collection of stalls and carts where farmers and craftspeople sold their goods. The reactions here were more varied. Some vendors ignored them completely, pretending they didn't exist. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. But a few, a precious few, nodded in greeting or offered tentative smiles. At a produce stall, the farmer's wife, a round woman with flour-dusted hands, made a point of addressing Taya directly. "Those squash you're looking at, fresh picked this morning. Best in the territory, if I do say so myself." "They look wonderful," Taya said carefully, unsure if this was genuine friendliness or a trap. "Take 3 for the price of 2. First-time customer discount." The woman winked. "Name's Ida Brennan. And before you ask, yes, my husband's the one who delivers supplies. And yes, he came home Tuesday spouting nonsense about you. I set him straight. Man's got a good heart, but sometimes his brain doesn't engage before his mouth does." Taya bought the squash, touched by this small gesture of kindness from an unexpected source. They were halfway through the market when trouble finally materialized. Garrison appeared with 4 other men, the same group that had ridden out to the ranch. They positioned themselves to block the path forward, arms crossed, faces hard. "This has gone far enough," Garrison announced loudly, his voice carrying across the market. "We're not going to stand by and watch our town be corrupted by savages." The word hung in the air like poison. Taya felt it hit her chest like a physical blow, felt old wounds tear open. Beside her, Caleb went rigid with anger. But before either of them could respond, Sheriff Pike dismounted and walked forward, placing himself between them and Garrison. "That's enough, Garrison," Pike said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're disturbing the peace." "I'm disturbing the peace? She's the one who doesn't belong here?" Garrison gestured wildly at Taya. "She's a bit—" "Careful," Pike interrupted. Very careful what you say next, because if you finish that sentence with anything other than human being deserving of respect, I'm going to arrest you for harassment and hate speech. You can't arrest me for speaking the truth. I can arrest you for threatening behavior in a public space. I can arrest you for creating a disturbance. I can arrest you for a dozen different things, and believe me, I'm looking for an excuse right now. Pike's hand rested on his gun belt. So here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to step aside and let these people pass. Then you're going to go about your business without further incident, or you're going to spend the rest of Saturday in a jail cell. Your choice. Garrison looked around, clearly hoping for support from the crowd that had gathered. But Judge Morrison had stood up from his chair, his presence a reminder of legal authority. Clara Pritchard had moved to stand beside Taya, her expression fierce. Margaret Foster had stepped forward with her baby, positioning herself on Taya's other side. Daniel Worth stood with them, trembling but present. And scattered through the crowd, other faces showed not agreement with Garrison, but discomfort with his tactics. "This isn't over," Garrison finally said, but he stepped aside. "Yes, it is," Pike replied, "for today at least. Now move along." Garrison and his friends retreated, but slowly, making sure everyone saw their defiance. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming, though now they were all about what had just transpired. Caleb leaned close to Taya. "You okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. But she was still standing, still here, still visible. They completed their circuit of the market without further incident, though the tension never fully dissipated. By the time they returned to the north end of Main Street, Taya felt exhausted. Not from physical labor, but from the emotional toll of being watched, judged, threatened, and defended in the space of an hour. "You did well," Clara said, touching Taya's arm gently. "Both of you. You showed this town that you're not afraid, that you're not going anywhere. That matters more than you know." "Thank you," Taya managed. "All of you, for standing with us." "That's what decent people do," Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of his years. "They stand together against indecency. It's not complicated, though some folks try to make it so." Pike remounted his horse. "I'll ride back with you part way. Make sure you get home safe. And I'll keep an eye on Garrison and his friends. They're angry, and angry men do stupid things." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, all of them processing what had happened. Pike left them at the turnoff to Caleb's property, tipping his hat in farewell. Caleb and Taya continued alone, the horse plodding steadily, the cart creaking. "We did it," Caleb finally said as the ranch came into view. "We survived it," Taya corrected. "That's not quite the same thing." "But it's something. It's a start." They unloaded the supplies in silence, both too drained for conversation. But as Taya carried the last sack of flour into the house, Caleb stopped her. "Taya, I'm proud of you, of how you handled yourself today. Rachel would have been proud too." The words nearly undid her. Taya set down the flour and turned away, not wanting him to see the tears that threatened. "I should get to the barn, clean up, rest." "Stay," Caleb said quietly. "Have dinner with me. In the house. We've earned it, don't you think, after today?" Taya turned back to look at him. This was crossing a line they'd been careful not to cross. Her domain was the barn, his was the house, and keeping those boundaries clear protected them both from gossip. But he was right. After what they'd been through today, after standing together against hatred and fear, some boundaries felt less important. "Dinner," she agreed, "but then I'm going back to the barn." "Of course." They prepared the meal together, simple food made special by the fact that they were eating it in celebration of survival. They talked about small things, avoiding the heavy topics of the day, letting themselves be just two people sharing a meal rather than symbols of social change. When dinner was finished and Taya finally returned to the barn, she lay in the hayloft and stared up at the dark rafters. Today had been terrifying and exhausting and at times humiliating, but they'd done it. They'd walked through Silver Creek together and emerged intact on the other side. It was just one day, one small victory in what would likely be a long battle, but it was a victory nonetheless. And tomorrow, they would wake up and do the work of building a life. Together. Despite everything the world threw at them, that was worth more than $3. That was worth everything. The weeks following their first appearance in Silver Creek settled into a pattern that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the daily rhythms of ranch work, feeding animals, mending fences, harvesting vegetables from the garden that Taya had coaxed back to life. Extraordinary in the way two people who'd been strangers were learning to exist as something more than employer and employee, something that defied easy categorization. Caleb stopped treating Taya like a hired hand and started treating her like a partner. When decisions needed to be made about the ranch, he consulted her. When problems arose, they solved them together. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the house stopped being his domain and the barn stopped being hers. She found herself staying for dinner more nights than not, their conversation stretching long after the food was gone. He started appearing in the barn in the evenings, helping her with tasks that didn't really require two people, both of them finding excuses to extend the day just a little longer. The town's reaction evolved more slowly. On their second Saturday visit to the market, fewer people stared. On the third, a few more vendors engaged them in actual conversation beyond the transaction of commerce. Margaret Foster became a regular friendly face, often seeking Taya out to chat about her son's teething troubles, or to ask advice about preserving food. Taya's methods, learned from her grandmother, were different from the white settlers' ways, but often more effective. But not everyone softened. Garrison and his core group of supporters remained hostile, though Sheriff Pike's watchful presence kept their hostility from escalating into action. The petition to invalidate employment contracts between white landowners and Indian workers gained signatures, 37 in total, before Judge Morrison formally rejected it as unconstitutional and refused to hear any challenge. That should have been the end of it, but Taya knew better. Hatred didn't disappear just because the law said it should. October gave way to November, and November brought the first real cold. Frost appeared on the ground in the mornings, and Taya's breath plumed white in the pre-dawn darkness of the barn. She'd fashioned herself a better sleeping arrangement with extra blankets Caleb had insisted she take, but the barn was not built for winter comfort. On a particularly cold Tuesday morning, she emerged shivering to find Caleb waiting on the porch with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "That's it," he said without preamble. "This has gone on long enough." "What has?" "You freezing in that barn every night. Winter's coming for real, Taya. In another month, it'll be below freezing most nights. You'll be miserable, maybe sick." He held out one of the cups. "Move into the house." Taya took the coffee, but shook her head. "We've talked about this. People already gossip. If I move into the house, then they'll gossip more." "So what? They're already gossiping. They've been gossiping since day one. At least you'll be warm and safe." He set his cup down, his expression serious. "Look, I know why you've been keeping that boundary. I know you think it protects both of us. But I'm telling you right now, I don't care what people think anymore. I care that you're comfortable and healthy. The house has a spare room, Rachel's sewing room. It's small, but it's got a bed and a stove vent that keeps it warm. It's yours if you want it." "Caleb, no conditions, no expectations. Just a warm place to sleep that doesn't require you to burrow under 6 blankets and still wake up cold." He picked up his coffee again. "Think about it, but think fast because that storm rolling in tonight is going to drop temperatures another 10 degrees. He was right about the storm. It hit just after sunset, bringing wind that howled around the barn and found every crack and gap in the walls. Taya huddled under her blankets, teeth chattering, trying to convince herself that this was fine, that she'd survived worse, that maintaining boundaries was worth a little discomfort. But by midnight, with the temperature still dropping and her body refusing to generate enough heat, she admitted defeat. She gathered her few belongings, the blue dress, her worn work clothes, the $3 silver she still kept, and fought her way through the wind to the house. She knocked, hating that she had to, hating that she was giving in. The door opened immediately, and Caleb stood there already dressed, as if he'd been waiting. "Smart decision," he said, stepping aside. "Come on, I've got the stove going." The house was blessedly warm after the barn's bitter cold. Caleb led her down a short hallway to a small room at the back. He'd been busy in the hours since their morning conversation. A bed had been made up with clean sheets and a thick quilt. A small table held a pitcher and basin, and a lantern cast warm light across walls painted a soft yellow. It was Rachel's space. Caleb said quietly. She'd sew in here during the day, work on quilts and mending. I haven't changed anything, but I've kept it clean. Thought maybe someday. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. Anyway, it's yours now, for as long as you need it. Taya set down her bundle, running her hand across the quilt. This is too much. It's a room. In a house that has 3 rooms standing empty, nothing about this is too much. He moved toward the door, then paused. Taya, I'm glad you came inside. I was worried about you out there. After he left, Taya sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. She'd crossed another threshold, literally and figuratively. She was no longer the hired help who slept in the barn. She was something else now, something that didn't have a name yet, but felt significant. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the sound of Caleb moving around in the kitchen. When she emerged, dressed in her work clothes and with her hair braided, he was setting 2 plates on the table. Figured we might as well have breakfast together if we're both starting from the same place, he said, his tone casual but his eyes watching her carefully, checking if she regretted last night's decision. Makes sense, she agreed and sat down. They ate in comfortable silence, a pattern they'd established over weeks of shared meals. But this felt different, more domestic, more intimate. They weren't employer and employee having a working lunch. They were 2 people sharing a home, sharing space, sharing a life. The town noticed immediately, of course. On their next visit to Silver Creek, the whispers were louder, the stares more pointed, but Clara Pritchard shut down the worst of it with her characteristic bluntness. Miss Redbird moved into the house because it's winter and the barn is freezing, she announced to a group of gossiping women outside the general store, her voice loud enough to carry. She's living in the spare room like any sensible employee would. If you find that scandalous, the problem is with your minds, not their actions. Still, the damage was done. The gossip took on a new flavor, speculation about impropriety, suggestions that Caleb had been corrupted, insinuations about Taya's motives. It all came to a head 3 weeks later when the preacher himself, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, arrived at the ranch unannounced. Taya was in the garden, harvesting the last of the winter squash, when she heard the carriage. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and watched as an elderly man in black descended with the careful movements of someone whose joints protested every motion. Caleb emerged from the barn, his expression wary. Reverend Whitmore, this is unexpected. I felt it was time we had a conversation, Mr. Holt, the Reverend said, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. About your situation. My situation is just fine, Reverend. Is it? Whitmore's gaze swept over to Taya, standing in the garden with dirt under her nails and squash at her feet. There's been talk, Caleb, serious talk, about the propriety of your arrangement with this woman. Her name is Taya Redbird, Caleb said, his voice hardening. And our arrangement is legal, documented, and none of anyone's business. Everything that happens in this community is the community's business. We're all accountable to each other and to God. Whitmore clasped his hands behind his back. The Bible is clear about the company we keep, about maintaining appearances. The Bible is also clear about helping those in need, Taya interrupted, stepping forward. About showing mercy to strangers, about not judging others lest you be judged yourself. Or do those parts not count when it's inconvenient? Whitmore's eyebrows rose. You quote scripture? My mother was taught by missionaries. She taught me. I know what your book says about love and compassion and treating others as you'd want to be treated. Taya crossed her arms. Seems to me your congregation remembers the parts about judgment, but forgets the parts about mercy. The concern isn't your employment, Whitmore said stiffly. It's the living arrangement. An unmarried man and an unmarried woman under the same roof, in separate rooms, Caleb cut in, with separate lives, working a ranch together because that's what the ranch requires. Perception matters, Mr. Holt, and the perception is that something inappropriate is happening here. Then people need better imaginations, Caleb said flatly. Is that all, Reverend? Because we have work to do. Whitmore looked between them, his expression a mixture of frustration and something that might have been genuine concern. I'm not your enemy, Caleb. I remember Rachel. I remember how devoted you were to her. I remember the man you were before grief closed you off. And I see you now, coming back to life, finding purpose again. That's good. But the path you're walking is dangerous for both of you. More dangerous than turning away someone who needed help? Taya asked. More dangerous than letting fear and prejudice dictate who deserves compassion. You don't understand how fragile peace is in places like Silver Creek, Whitmore said. How quickly good people can be pushed into doing bad things when they feel their way of life is threatened. Is that a warning? Caleb's voice was ice. It's an observation and a piece of advice. If you care about Miss Redbird's safety, consider making your arrangement more permanent, more socially acceptable. What are you suggesting? Taya demanded. Whitmore met her eyes. I'm suggesting that marriage would solve a great many problems. It would legitimize your living situation, protect you both legally, and remove the ammunition your detractors are using against you. The word hung in the air between them, massive and impossible. Taya felt her heart hammering. Marriage. To Caleb. The idea was absurd. They barely knew each other, had been living and working together for less than 2 months. They were business partners, friends perhaps, but marriage? Get off my property, Caleb said, his voice shaking with rage. Right now. Caleb, I'm trying to help. You're trying to force us into a box that makes you comfortable. You're trying to fix a problem that only exists because people like you can't accept that a man and a woman might actually work together without some romantic entanglement. Caleb pointed toward the road. We don't need your help, and we sure as hell don't need your advice about marriage. Now leave. Whitmore climbed back into his carriage with wounded dignity. I'll pray for you both, he said, and drove away. After he left, Caleb and Taya stood in the yard, the Reverend's suggestion echoing between them. That was ridiculous, Caleb finally said. Marriage, as if that would solve anything. Completely ridiculous, Taya agreed. We barely know each other. Hardly at all. And marriage should be about love, not convenience. Absolutely. They were both quiet for a moment. Then Caleb said, Though I suppose it would solve the legal problems and the gossip. It would make things simpler, Taya admitted, in a practical sense. Very practical. Another pause. Taya bent to pick up a squash, needing something to do with her hands. Rachel wouldn't want you to marry someone just to satisfy the town's sense of propriety. No, she wouldn't. Caleb kicked at the dirt. She'd want me to marry someone I respected, someone I trusted, someone who made me want to be better than I am. Taya looked up at him, heart in her throat. Caleb, I'm not proposing, he said quickly. I'm just thinking out loud. Badly. He ran his hand through his hair. I should get back to work. Forget I said anything. He walked back toward the barn, leaving Taya standing in the garden with a squash in her hands and her mind spinning. Marriage. The word kept echoing, kept reshaping itself from absurd to possible to something she was afraid to examine too closely. The first snow came a week later, transforming the ranch into something from a photograph. Pristine and beautiful and bitterly cold. They worked together to winterize everything, preparing for the hard months ahead. And in the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about everything except the conversation with Whitmore, the suggestion that still hung between them unaddressed. December arrived, and with it came unexpected trouble. Caleb had ridden into town alone for supplies, insisting Taya stay home because the roads were icy and dangerous. He'd been gone for 3 hours, longer than expected, when Sheriff Pike appeared at the ranch, his expression grim. Miss Redbird, you need to come with me. There's been an incident. Taya's blood went cold. What kind of incident? Where's Caleb? He's all right, mostly, but there was a fight at the saloon. Garrison and his friends cornered him, started saying things about you. Caleb threw the first punch. Pike's mouth was a tight line. Turned into a full brawl. Took 4 men to pull them apart. Caleb's got a black eye and some bruised ribs, but he's insisting he won't press charges if they won't. I'm trying to mediate, but he's being stubborn. Thought maybe you could talk sense into him. They rode into town together, Pike explaining the details as they went. Garrison had confronted Caleb in the general store, made crude remarks about Taya, suggested that Caleb was being manipulated. Caleb had told him to shut his mouth. Garrison had kept talking, and Caleb had introduced his fist to Garrison's jaw. The thing is, Pike said as they approached the sheriff's office, Garrison's talking about filing assault charges. His friends are backing up his version, that Caleb attacked unprovoked. It could get ugly. They found Caleb sitting in Pike's office, holding a cloth to his swelling eye. When he saw Taya, he tried to stand, then winced and sat back down. "You shouldn't have come into town," he said. "Roads are dangerous. You got into a fight defending my honor, and you're worried about icy roads?" Taya knelt beside his chair, gently moving his hand to examine the damage. "You're an idiot. He was saying terrible things about you. I've heard terrible things before. I'll hear them again. You can't fight everyone who says something cruel." "I can try." Despite everything, Taya felt warmth spread through her chest. This man, this stubborn, grieving, decent man, had risked arrest defending her reputation. It was foolish and wonderful and completely impractical. Sheriff Pike cleared his throat. "Here's the situation. I can arrest Caleb for assault, or I can arrest all of them for creating a public disturbance. Neither option helps anyone. What I'd prefer is for cooler heads to prevail and everyone to walk away from this." "I'll walk away," Caleb said, "but I'm not apologizing." "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to not make this worse." Pike leaned against his desk. "Garrison's demanding satisfaction. Says his reputation's been damaged, his honor insulted." "His honor?" Taya repeated bitterly. "What about mine? What about what he said about me?" "In the eyes of men like Garrison, you don't have honor to insult," Pike said bluntly. "That's the ugly truth, which is why this situation is so volatile." The door opened and Judge Morrison entered, followed by Clara Pritchard and, surprisingly, Reverend Whitmore. The small office suddenly felt very crowded. "I've heard about the altercation," Morrison said without preamble, "and I've been in consultation with the Reverend and Mrs. Pritchard about a possible solution." "If it involves apologizing to Garrison, you can forget it," Caleb said. "It doesn't." Morrison pulled out a folded document. "It involves making your relationship with Miss Redbird official in a way that even the most hostile critics would have to respect." Taya felt her stomach drop. "You're talking about marriage." "I'm talking about legal protection," Morrison corrected. "Miss Redbird, as things stand now, you're vulnerable. Your employment contract gives you some rights, but not many. You can be asked to leave Silver Creek at any time. You have no legal standing beyond what Mr. Holt provides. But as his wife, you'd have full legal status, property rights, protection under territorial law. And perhaps most importantly, any insult to you would be an insult to him, legally actionable." "You want us to get married to solve a political problem," Taya said flatly. "I want you to get married to survive," Clara interjected. "Because like it or not, this situation is escalating. Garrison's not going to let this go. He's already talking about running for mayor next year on a platform of moral restoration. If he wins, he'll make your life hell. But if you're married, legitimately, legally married, he loses his best weapon against you." "This is insane," Caleb said. "We can't just—" "Marriage isn't something you do for political convenience." "Sometimes it is," Whitmore said quietly. "I've performed dozens of marriages in my time. Some were love matches, some were practical arrangements. Some started as one and became the other. There's no shame in marrying for practical reasons, as long as both parties are honest about what they're entering into." Taya looked at Caleb, really looked at him. His eye was swelling shut, his lip was split, and he was holding his ribs gingerly. He'd gotten these injuries defending her, and now these well-meaning people were suggesting they formalize a relationship that barely existed. "Can we have a moment alone?" Taya asked. "Just Caleb and me?" Everyone filed out, leaving them in the office. Taya pulled up a chair and sat across from Caleb, their knees almost touching. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. "I think it's crazy. I think we're being pushed into something we're not ready for." He paused. "But I also think they're right about the danger. Garrison's not going to stop. And I can't protect you with my fists. Today proved that." "So you'd marry me to protect me?" "I'd marry you because—" He stopped, started again. "Because somewhere in the last 2 months, you've become the most important person in my life. Because I wake up thinking about what we'll work on together that day. Because I go to sleep grateful that you're safe under my roof. Because when Garrison said those things about you, I didn't think, I just acted. And that scared me. How much I cared." Taya felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb, I'm not saying I'm in love with you. That would be dishonest, and you deserve honesty. I'm still grieving Rachel. I probably will be for years. But I care about you, I respect you, I trust you, and maybe that's not romantic love, but it's something real. He reached out, took her hand. If we do this, if we get married, it'll be real. Not a performance for the town. A real partnership, real commitment. Can you live with that? Taya looked down at their joined hands. His was rough with calluses, strong, warm. The same hand that had opened a door when all others closed. The same hand that had taught her how to repair fences and gentle, skittish horses. The same hand that had just fought for her honor. She thought about Nawel, her first husband, lost to violence. She thought about the months of running, of surviving, of being alone. And she thought about the last 2 months here, on this ranch, with this man, working together, building together, becoming something neither of them could have predicted. I can live with that, she said quietly. I think maybe I already am. They were married 2 days later in Judge Morrison's private chambers, with Sheriff Pike and Clara Pritchard as witnesses. Reverend Whitmore performed the ceremony, brief, dignified, and oddly moving despite the circumstances. Taya wore the blue dress. Caleb wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, promising partnership and respect and mutual protection, the words felt more meaningful than either had expected. The ring Caleb slipped on her finger had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band he'd kept in a drawer, unsure what to do with it. It fit perfectly. After the ceremony, they signed the documents that made it official. Mrs. Taya Holt. The name felt strange and right at the same time. You'll need to file this with the territorial records, Morrison told them, and I'd suggest making the announcement public as soon as possible. Don't give the gossips time to create their own narrative. They made the announcement that very afternoon, standing together in front of the general store while Sheriff Pike ensured order. The reaction was mixed: shock, outrage, reluctant acceptance, and from a surprising number of people, relief. Margaret Foster burst into tears and hugged Taya, whispering, "Now maybe people will leave you alone." Ida Brennan, the farmer's wife, declared it the most romantic thing she'd heard in years. And several townspeople who'd been neutral suddenly seemed willing to accept Taya now that she had the legitimacy of marriage. But Garrison and his supporters were furious. Garrison himself stood on the opposite boardwalk, his face purple with rage, and shouted, "This isn't over, Holt. You've contaminated your family line, spat on everything decent folks believe in." "My family line is my business," Caleb shouted back. "And if you've got a problem with who I married, take it up with God and the territorial judge, because they both sanctioned it." They rode back to the ranch in the fading afternoon light, now husband and wife in the eyes of the law, if not yet in their own minds. The ring on Taya's finger caught the sunlight, glinting gold. "That was quite a day," Caleb said as they pulled into the yard. "Quite a day," Taya agreed. "Are you having regrets?" "No." His answer was immediate. "Are you?" "No." And she was surprised to find she meant it. They tended to the evening chores together, the familiar routines grounding them after the chaos of the day. But when it came time to go inside, they both hesitated at the door. "So," Caleb said awkwardly, "we're married now." "We are." "But nothing has to change. I mean, your room is still your room. This is still a partnership, not... I'm not expecting..." He trailed off, his face reddening. Taya took pity on him. "I know what you're not expecting, and you're right. Nothing has to change. Except now I'm legally protected, and people have one less thing to gossip about." "Right, exactly." He opened the door. "So, dinner?" "Dinner sounds good." They prepared the meal together as they had for weeks, but now there was a new awareness between them. The word wife and husband hung in the air, reshaping everything even as they tried to pretend it didn't. Winter deepened and life on the ranch continued. But slowly, imperceptibly, things did change. Not in dramatic ways, but in small accumulations of intimacy. Caleb started calling her by her first name without the Miss prefix. Taya began leaving her door open in the evenings, allowing conversation to flow more easily between her room and the rest of the house. They developed private jokes, finished each other's sentences, moved around each other in the kitchen with the unconscious choreography of people who knew each other's rhythms. And one night in late January, when a blizzard howled outside and the stove in Taya's room couldn't quite keep out the cold, Caleb appeared at her door with extra blankets. "Thought you might need these," he said. "Temperature's dropping fast." "Thank you." She took the blankets, but he didn't leave. He stood in the doorway, something unspoken in his expression. "Taya, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" "Here, with me, with this life we're building?" She considered the question carefully, wanting to give him honesty. "I'm not sure happy is the word. I'm content, safe, purposeful. I wake up without dread, and I go to sleep without fear. That's more than I've had in years." "But you're not happy. Are you?" He leaned against the door frame. "I'm less sad than I was. That's something, and I'm grateful for your presence, your partnership. But you're right. Happy isn't quite the word yet." "Maybe that comes later," Taya suggested. "Maybe we're building toward it." "Maybe." He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Good night, Mrs. Holt." "Good night, Mr. Holt." He closed the door and Taya lay down under the extra blankets, thinking about happiness and contentment and the difference between them. And for the first time since Nahiwel's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than just survival. A future with laughter and ease and possibly even joy. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the frozen ground yielding inch by inch to warmth and possibility. With the thaw came the inevitable confrontation they'd been dreading. Garrison, apparently driven to desperation by the success of Caleb and Taya's marriage, by the way the town had gradually accepted them, made one final attempt to drive them out. He arrived at the ranch on a warm April morning with the same 4 men who'd accompanied him before, plus 2 new recruits. They came armed, rifles visible in saddle holsters, hands resting on gun belts, and their intentions were clear. "This is your last chance, Holt," Garrison called from horseback. "Leave Silver Creek, take your squaw wife and go somewhere your kind is welcome." Caleb emerged from the barn, and Taya appeared from the house. They stood together, united, unafraid. "This is my land," Caleb said calmly. "My home. Our home. We're not going anywhere. Then we'll burn you out." Before Garrison could make good on the threat, Sheriff Pike appeared from around the side of the house, his rifle aimed at Garrison's chest. Behind him came Judge Morrison, Daniel Worth, Clara Pritchard, Margaret Foster, and her husband, Ida Brennan, and her husband, and a dozen other townspeople, all armed, all determined. "I don't think you will," Pike said quietly. "Because, if you try, you'll have to go through all of us first." Garrison looked around at the assembled group, his face draining of color as he realized he was outmanned and outgunned. "This is our town," Clara Pritchard said firmly, "and we decide who belongs here, not you. The Holts are members of this community, legally married, legally employed, and under our protection. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who should leave." The standoff lasted for a long, tense minute. Then Garrison wheeled his horse around and rode away, his companions following. They'd return to Silver Creek, would continue to harbor their hatred, would find new targets for their fear and anger. But they wouldn't be back to this ranch. They'd lost, and everyone knew it. After the crowd dispersed, after the thanks had been given and the supporters had ridden back to town, Caleb and Taya stood alone in their yard, processing what had just happened. "The town stood up for us," Taya said, still amazed. "They actually came to help." "Not the whole town, but enough of it." Caleb put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "We changed some minds, not all of them, but some. That's how change happens, one person at a time." Taya leaned into him, allowing herself to accept the comfort and support. "Your wife would be proud of you, of what you've built here." "What we've built," he corrected. "This isn't just my ranch anymore, it's ours. You've put as much work and heart into it as I have." She looked up at him, at this man who'd opened his door when all others closed, who'd given her not just work but dignity, not just shelter but home. And somewhere in that look, something shifted. The careful partnership they'd maintained, the respectful distance, the boundaries they'd drawn, all of it dissolved. "Caleb," she said quietly, I think I'm falling in love with you. He went very still. Taya, I know we married for practical reasons. I know you're still grieving Rachel, and that's okay. I'm not asking for anything you can't give. I just wanted you to know that somewhere between that first night and now, you became more than a refuge. You became home. Caleb cupped her face gently with both hands. I think I've been falling in love with you too. Slowly, without realizing it. The way spring comes. So gradual you don't notice until suddenly everything's green and alive and beautiful. He kissed her forehead tenderly. Rachel will always be part of my past, part of who I am. But you're my present, my future. And I'm grateful every day that you knocked on my door with $3 and a desperate need for water. Best $3 I ever spent, Taya said, and kissed him properly, deeply, letting years of fear and loneliness and grief dissolve into something new, something that tasted like hope. They stood there in the spring sunshine, two broken people who'd somehow managed to make each other whole. The road had been hard and would likely be hard again. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight, and Silver Creek would probably always have its garrisons, its small-minded, fearful souls who saw difference as threat. But they would face it together. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Taya pulled the $3 from her pocket. She'd kept them all this time, even after she'd started earning money, even after she'd become Mrs. Holt with full legal rights and protections. They'd become a talisman, a reminder of how far she'd come. Do you remember what you said that first night? She asked Caleb. When I tried to pay you, I said water and soap weren't worth that much. And I said I'd work for it. She held up the coins, letting them catch the fading light. I think I've paid my debt. You paid that debt months ago. Everything since has been partnership, not payment. Then I'd like to give these to you. She pressed the coins into his hand. Not as payment, as a reminder of the night you chose compassion over fear, of the door that opened when all others closed, of $3 that changed two lives. Caleb looked down at the coins, then back at her, his eyes bright with emotion. These started everything, didn't they? No, Taya corrected. You did, when you listened to your wife's voice reminding you what mercy costs. These were just the excuse. He closed his fingers around the coins, then reached for her hand with his free one, linking them together. What should we do with them? Keep them. Frame them, maybe. Tell our children about them someday. Children, Caleb repeated, the word full of possibility and hope. You want children? I want a future. And children are part of that, if you're willing. I'm willing, he said. I'm willing to build whatever life we can imagine together. A ranch, a family, a place where anyone who knocks on our door gets water and kindness, no matter who they are or where they come from. A place where $3 is enough to start a revolution, Taya added. The best kind of revolution, Caleb agreed. The kind that happens one open door at a time. They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd chosen each other again and again despite every obstacle the world placed in their path. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over Taya during her desperate walk to Silver Creek, the same stars that had shone on Rachel's grave and Caleb's grief. But tonight, they shone on something new, on hope fulfilled, on love discovered, on a home built from nothing but determination, partnership, and the revolutionary act of treating each other with dignity and respect. In the years that followed, the story of the $3 became legend in Silver Creek. People told it to their children, who told it to their children. The tale of the Apache woman who knocked on a door with $3 and a desperate plea, and the widowed rancher who chose compassion over fear. How they became partners, then spouses, then pillars of the community. How their ranch became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over hatred. The 3 coins themselves were framed and hung above the fireplace, a reminder of how small acts of kindness could ripple outward, could change not just individual lives, but entire communities. And when visitors asked about them, Caleb and Taya would tell the story together, finishing each other's sentences, their hands linked, their love evident in every word. It wasn't a perfect life. Such things didn't exist. There were still people in Silver Creek who never fully accepted Taya, still moments of tension and misunderstanding. But they had each other, and they had a home, and they had proof that $3 and the courage to knock on one more door could be the beginning of everything. The house no longer echoed with grief. It rang with laughter, with children's voices, with the sounds of a life fully lived. And on quiet evenings, when Caleb and Taya sat on their porch watching the sunset over the prairie they'd tended together for decades, they would remember that first night. The knock, the hesitation, the door that opened. And they would be grateful for $3, a basin of water, and the courage to believe that somewhere in this hard world there was still room for mercy, still space for love, still hope for tomorrow. The wind swept across the prairie, carrying away the last of the dust between them, between past and present, between fear and hope. And in its place, it left peace, purpose, home. That was worth more than $3. That was worth everything.